Vast, Provable, and Ignored English Government Corruption by Sean Grinyer. Vast, fully provable, and completely ignored government corruption for the attention of the following people. Sir Brian Levison of IPCO, formerly head of Queen's Bench Division High Court. Lord Burnett of Malden, Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales. The Right Honourable Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of Her Majesty's Government. Robert Buckland, the Justice Minister. Cressida Dick, Metropolitan Police Commissioner. Sir Gary Streeter, MP for South West Devon. Johnny Mercer, Under Secretary of State for Defence, Peoples and Veterans. Please also pass on to Her Majesty the Queen as she needs to decide whether to allow criminals to run her country. I will also send a paper copy in the post to make sure she receives it. If you all choose to ignore the vast, easily provable, ongoing, and previously ignored government corruption set out in this email in order to keep covering it up and concealing it, then please send this information on to Her Majesty the Queen. It is in Her Majesty's court that the government are continuously corrupting them and, as a result, the law is being broken and flagrantly abused. As the head of the armed forces in the royal courts, Her Majesty the Queen needs to know that the government is refusing at all costs to investigate their own said behavior, public inquiry, and to not even stop this said ongoing behavior and abuse of power. This request for a public inquiry has already been completely ignored by my constituency MP, Sir Gary Streeter, numerous times without a reason, and he has also ignored my referral request for a complaint to the Ombudsman for Veteran UK's vast, provable corruption, whilst Veteran UK's Minister, Johnny Mercer, has completely ignored me throughout and endorsed Veteran UK's said behavior. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, as well as the Met Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, and Sir Brian Levison, which he is head of the Queen's Bench Division of the High Court, have all completely ignored this said situation. I am asking all the said FAO to investigate all of the matters set out in this email letter regarding the long line of said miscarriages of justice outlined here that can be traced back to initial incident on 27th July 1999, where I was initially subject to 6 criminal charges that were completely fabricated but resulted in only a wrongful conviction for one, i.e., resisting or obstructing a constable in the execution of his duty. This only happened after lie after lie was shown in court by the two officers involved with having differing statements. I was the victim during this said incident after only nicely asking for my counsel flat keys back and being refused with the police being called, of which I agreed to happen to resolve the said issue. I ended up being continuously sprayed with CS gas on the back of my head when I was being nice and fully cooperating with the police at all times whilst they were trying to arrest me for no reason. So I headed towards the door away from them, and they sprayed the said CS gas on me from behind. I have been trying to fight these outlined miscarriages of justice since this said 1999 first wrongful conviction, and this was the start of realizing the collusion between the police, the judicial system, and all their associates, i.e. solicitors in this said case, i.e. dropping me when I chose to fight this said incident, and then throughout every process since this, the government has shown involvement to corrupt every process. My opinion is that they conduct a very well-oiled machine against people fighting against the government and its workers, and I'm sure if this gets out, many others will come forward or relate their own similar situations, even if it's only one situation they encountered instead of the amount I've had. I can fully prove with a full public inquiry into all these outlined and said matters that I have been the victim of government corruption in the following 4 main areas. 1. I was the subject of a wrongful conviction at Plymouth Crown Court on 12 December 2003. This conviction came about after I was set up by the police. In support of their case, the police provided witness statements that were blatantly untrue. They also presented fabricated witness statements from people who didn't exist. I assert that my wrongful conviction in this case was the result of collusion between the police, Wolf Stand solicitors, Judge William Taylor. The government stopped the Criminal Case Review Commission from investigating my complaint for wrongful conviction. Number 2. On April 2009, my case against Plymouth Hospitals, NHS, case number 9P101426, was closed to the public after Judge Cotter stated that, quote, it wasn't in the public's best interest to see it, end quote. I believe this was an attempt to cover up and conceal the facts of the case and is further evidence of corruption within the judicial system. This was compounded by the Royal Court of Appeal's decision to reject my appeal with no reasons given. Number 3. On 16th May 2018, my adjourned War Pension Tribunal hearing, ENT/00210/2017, was completely corrupted by the government. I had even pre-warned them that I knew how they would behave before the hearing in an email dated 2nd October 2017. The outcome of the panel was a result of the vast corruption inherent in Veterans UK. This corruption was completely ignored and covered up in my appeal rejection by the Armed Forces War Pension Tribunal Service. Number 4. As a result of this long-standing miscarriage of justice, I put in a civil claim to the High Court, Queen's Bench Division, Sean Robert Grinyer versus MOD QB /2018/00524. Institutional corruption has also been evident throughout this case, and my complaints and communications with Sir Brian Levison in relation to this have been completely ignored. Maybe he will now state that the said corrupted court didn't pass the complaints and communication to him now that he has left his position. I will set out in this letter detailed information in regards to the 4 areas above, and I strongly believe that there needs to be a full public inquiry into this systemic government corruption evidenced here. If this can all be done towards me, then how many other cases are there of people who have suffered miscarriages of justice in similar situations? Unfortunately, the law doesn't seem to apply to the government whatsoever, and they abuse it like an organized criminal unit, which must be exposed to start again with a law-abiding government that the people elect in a fair manner. This is based on everything that is set out here. Not only is everything that I state here completely true, as the truth always stays the same, and you don't have to remember anything, whereas liars have to remember every lie, and I have never been picked up throughout lying by the government, has been consistently, and try and ignore their behavior and complaints and cover it up. Everything is also easily provable, hence the government completely ignoring me. If they could pick up on one lie, they could easily dismiss me off. And if I wasn't the only truth teller in the NHS case, they would definitely state I was a mentally ill liar. The government knows everything I stated here is the truth, as they've been ignoring me for some time. I strongly believe that this is the reason behind the government ignoring my vast requests for a public inquiry into these matters, and is also why they have also stopped the Ombudsman from looking into Veteran UK's vast, provable corruption. I have offered numerous times to take an independent lie detector test to confirm everything that I have reported. However, I have not been able to fight this injustice, as I have been prevented from having legal assistance at every step of the way, apart from when I was allowed after I had already won my NHS case. I have been at a severely disadvantaged position throughout, with not only having well-documented severe mental health problems, but also by the government's associates, helping them constantly by refusing legal assistance, constantly towards me without being able to give valid reasons for their behavior, especially all the times I have tried to expose the government said corruption. All associates, solicitors, would ask me about the matter in question and be interested and want my name first, with stating they would get back to me with a decision at a later time. But they either never got back to me, or they gave me ridiculous excuses why they couldn't assist me. My only support worker during a period of 4 years until recently was Colonel Nigel Lewis of SSAFA and a VAPC member for Veteran UK, who, whilst having a judge as a friend, verified to Johnny Mercer's then Assistant Matthew Chowns via email that I'm 100% truthful in what I've said throughout, when he was trying unsuccessfully to assist my war pension application. However, for reasons that I will outline fully later, I have recently dismissed Colonel Lewis from his role as my support worker. A brief background leading up to the 4 main government corruption cases. After growing up with very good friends who were nice people like myself, I decided from a young age that I wanted to join the Army. I had already spent time in the Army Cadets and other associated groups before commencing the Army's pre-selection program. During this time, I passed all the appropriate checks and fitness tests without any problems. In September 1995, after just turning 17, I commenced Army Basic Infantry training at Lichtfield Barracks. I excelled there and was told that I would make an excellent soldier before passing out and signing on for 22 years Army service. I looked forward to going to my next phase of training, Specialist Infantry training at Catterick Garrison. In January of 1996, approximately, I commenced Specialist Infantry training at Catterick Garrison, where I was attacked for no reason by the NCO in charge and the other recruits while being trapped in my sleeping bag. After this incident, I had started to struggle with what had happened to me at the hands of my comrades and wondered how I would be able to trust people who were able to do this to their own colleagues. This type of group punishment and the resulting constant bullying eventually led me to ask to leave the Army. I gave an honest account of what had happened as my reason for wanting to leave, but my request was denied, and I was told that these things don't happen when you get to your regiment. It's nothing like here. I was put on a 3-month supervision order for asking to leave and for reporting the bullying. I also got backtracked to remove me from the situation, and I went on to complete the final exercise and head off to my regiment. In May of 1996, approximately, I joined the 2nd Battalion Devonshire and Dorset Regiment stationed in Barker Barracks, Paderborn, Germany. During this time, there was a complete disregard to the duty of care towards a minor. I was legally still a child and only 17 years of age at the time. The Army knowingly put Sergeant Hunt in charge of me whilst he was under investigation for bullying another soldier, Private Kearley. I was completely unaware of this at the time and was still under a 3-month supervision order for reporting the bullying I had encountered and asking to leave. During this time, Sergeant Hunt, for no reason and in front of others, picked me up off the floor by my throat and strangled me. After this episode, I again started to struggle with the situation, especially as I had been lied to by the Army, who had accepted that what had happened to me at the Catterick was normal there. I felt trapped and again experienced constant mass bullying and group punishments led by Sergeant Hunt. However, despite this high level of physical and psychological bullying, I still excelled in my duties when on exercise. I did not report Sergeant Hunt at the time for a number of reasons. The first being that I had already complained about what had happened to me at Catterick, but the Army hadn't taken this seriously and treated the behavior as normal. I also knew that I was stuck in the military for a minimum of 3 years after I turned 18, and was fearful that things would only get a lot worse for me if I reported the abuse again. Sergeant Hunt was subsequently demoted to Lance Corporal for bullying Private Kearley, but was still left in charge throughout the investigation and after his demotion. I went AWOL numerous times as a result of what happened to me, and I would purposely get myself locked away in the guardhouse to gain respite from the constant bullying. The Army eventually removed me from Sergeant Hunt's care and put me in HQ company, where Private Kearley was put also. As soon as the Army deemed me far too damaged by the constant severe bullying I had experienced, they decided to kick me out and to blame me for what had happened. They claimed that I had personality difficulties, even though they made sure that I wasn't seen by any medical professionals. They also claimed that I had missed a medical appointment 200 miles away in Germany. However, not only do I have no knowledge of this apparent appointment, I also cannot understand why the Army would have failed to provide transport to this medical, especially given my age at the time and the fact that they knew, and I was suffering from significant emotional and psychological trauma. The Army showed a significant degree of contempt towards me when they kicked me out by putting SNLR, services no longer required, in my Red Book, the equivalent to a civ in 1997. There were also other pages missing in the book, which effectively meant that I would be unemployable after leaving the Army. I had no help at all to rehabilitate myself, was left suffering with severe mental health problems that at the time I didn't even know I had. Changes to me after the Army. After the Army, my brain completely blocked out what had happened to me during my service. As I stated, I didn't know at the time that I had mental health problems, but I did know that I was a completely different person, but was struggling too much to understand or look into it. I suffered in silence, as I couldn't understand why I had vast problems that are all described in the complex PTSD diagnosis. I had extreme thoughts towards bad people that were difficult to understand and manage without having severe hypervigilance. That meant I had sleeping problems with my brain struggling to shut down, which in turn masked the outward signs of severe depression I was also suffering from. I struggled constantly with severe outbursts of anger towards anyone doing anything to me when I was being nice to them. I didn't realize that these extreme reactions and uncontrollable anger were symptoms of PTSD flashbacks directed towards anything that I associated with the blocked out bullying trauma. I felt a sense of shame, low self-worth, and couldn't trust anyone and tried to keep these complex and unsettling feelings to myself as much as possible, whilst having immense stress on me. I soon realized that I had to stay away and actively avoid other people as much as possible due to the extreme stress it put on me. The only work that I could get was as a doorman for a few hours a week because of the said way the Army discharged me. I quickly realized during this time that I struggled to control myself around people or groups who acted aggressively towards me when I was trying to help them or be nice to them, as I still had those qualities in me from before the Army. But the PTSD made me like a Jekyll and Hyde. Nice people wouldn't know there was anything wrong with me as they never triggered the PTSD. I made myself strong and would react to anyone being aggressive by quickly putting people in an unconscious state, e.g., by strangling them. I kept getting sacked for this, and word got around and names of psycho were given of which I didn't want. I was never arrested or charged with any wrongdoing, and no one was luckily killed, but the police did advise Jester's nightclub in Plymouth to fire me from my position there, and I don't know if other venues were told to dismiss me in the same way. Please note, the following incident happened before the first main government corruption case of 12 December 2003, and after the already said miscarriage of justice on 27 July 1999. I was working as a doorman alongside Martin Angus in a bar called Bar Rumba, formerly called Pharaoh's, which is in the Barbizon area of Plymouth in 2002. I was working during the afternoon because the World Cup was on, and this was when I was involved in a physical altercation with another male, which turned out to be an off-duty police officer. The said off-duty police officer had become aggressive after he wouldn't wait for the barmaid to okay his cleaning up of his urinating over the bar area that he had done in front of the said barmaid. This disgusting said urinating was done with his two colleagues present. All three were wearing suits. After I punched the said off-duty officer, he got aggressive. His two colleagues helped him up and took him away. However, the police spent time asking about the incident in the Barbican area of Plymouth and found out it was me, but I was not arrested and no charges were brought against me. However, I strongly believe that my card was marked following this incident and the police were looking for a reason to get back at me. The four main government-involved corruption cases. Number 1. Wrongful conviction, 12 December 2003. The actual incident that I was convicted and sentenced for in December 2003 had taken place a year earlier in December 2002. I didn't attend the original court hearing in 2002 due to two main reasons. The first of these related to the suspicions that I had been left with from the first miscarriage of justice in July of 1999, detailed above. I was concerned that I would suffer the same outcome here. The second reason related to bad things happening to those around me and the need that I felt to be around to protect these people. When I attended court on December When I attended court on December 2003, I walked in and was sentenced without knowing what was going on and what evidence had been presented against me. I was shocked at being sentenced to 26 months imprisonment for a driving offense. It was only in my prison cell that I was able to look at the evidence for the first time. As soon as I read the witness statements from the 2 police officers and the 2 supposed civilian witnesses, I was sure that the evidence against me had been fabricated. The photographs from the scene of the crash proved straight away that the police lied, and it was obvious from these photographs that the other 2 witness statements were made up and being used to set me up. When I raised my concerns with the solicitors Wolferstans from a prison phone, I was informed that they were unable to help me anymore. It was clear to me that there had been collusion between the presiding judge, Judge Taylor, the said solicitors, and the police. The report from the private investigator commissioned by my new solicitors to investigate the crash scene and the details surrounding the incident stated that the police lied about various aspects of the case, including the speed that I was allegedly driving at. However, when I discussed this with the investigator on a recorded prison telephone call and asked him why he hadn't looked into the main part of the fabricated evidence, i.e., the police and their other false witness statements, stated I crossed over into oncoming traffic, which was impossible, and the said photos proved this. He simply replied, "You do realize that I'm an ex-policeman." When I asked him to return the photographs, he declined my request. I was placed in Lay Hill Open Prison where I was serving my sentence without any problems. However, I strongly suspect that my protestations against the corrupt behavior of the judiciary and the police had got back to Judge Taylor. This resulted in the governor of Lay Hill Prison calling me into his office just to let me know he was friends with the judge who had sent me down. This was obviously meant to be a warning, and early the following morning several prison officers came to my door and told me that I was going back to Exeter Prison, BCAT. It seemed like they were anticipating me kicking off, but instead I contacted the Criminal Case Review Commission to report this miscarriage of justice. However, they refused to look into it, and I'm sure that the government stopped them from proceeding with an investigation. When I saw the probation service at the end of my prison sentence, I was clearly told, "The police won't bother you again." I struggled with this miscarriage of justice for many years and had to battle against a desire to find a way to force the police officers to tell the truth. This left me suffering badly with my mental health, as it was clear to me that there was a blanket of corruption that ensured protection for those who would lie and cheat to avoid justice and to damage others. Number 2. NHS Government Corruption Case, Sean Grinyer versus Plymouth Hospital's NHS Trust, 9P101426. This example of further corruption came about after I was advised by Raymond Stallard, ex-hospital manager, to put in a complaint against the hospital after my personal data had been inappropriately accessed multiple times by an NHS employee, which caused an incident that Raymond Stallard witnessed, which led to his said advice. I put in this complaint, and I explained in the meeting that the police had previously set me up and that I wouldn't accept being the victim of lies again due to the significant impact it had on my mental health. All I expected, as a result of this complaint, was for the perpetrators to be disciplined in line with the hospital's procedures and to ensure that this didn't happen again to me or anyone else. However, despite the evidence supporting me, including the perpetrator admitting to me that everyone does it, the NHS denied that there had been a breach and didn't follow up on the complaint. I tried to get legal assistance to fight this injustice, but was denied this, so became a forced litigant in person because of the hospital's lies. When I did manage to take the case to court, there was a long line of barriers put in my way to ensure that justice wasn't available to me. This included the court giving me the wrong information, not sending me orders so I couldn't respond to them, sending paperwork to the wrong address to ensure that I didn't receive it, sending me documents late, especially when there were time restrictions in place, and best of all, court staff being told they were not allowed to talk to me. These are clearly tricks used by the government to obstruct the course of justice. It took nearly a year for the case to get to the first stage of court proceedings, case management. When I explained my suspicions of corruption and collusion to Mr. Stallard, he responded by telling me that I was paranoid and that he had never witnessed a situation like the one that I was describing in all his previous dealings with the court as a hospital manager. I invited him to come to the case management hearing, which he did. Judge Griggs, who I have subsequently been told is a Freemason, refused my disclosure request to be able to prove my claim without being instructed to do so by the government's legal team. He lowered my claim to small claims level and asked to see the government's defense against me. When he had seen this, he responded to the legal team by saying, "This is not a defense against Mr. Grinyer. Stay behind afterwards and I will help you with it." Outside the court, with only myself and Mr. Stallard present, I explained my concern that the court and the NHS were working together to obstruct justice. Mr. Stallard was visibly shocked and afraid by what had happened, and he stated that he had never witnessed anything like that before. Following this, I put in a complaint to the Office for Judicial Complaints, and as a result, the court replaced Judge Griggs with Judge Cotter. However, the Office for Judicial Complaints completely ignored the content of my complaint against Judge Griggs and didn't pursue this at all. As a result, the government's legal team were allowed to keep Judge Griggs' defense. It is clear to me that despite having nearly a year to construct a defense against me, the government's legal team had no grounds to contest my case until Judge Griggs intervened for them and gave them one. Following this, the NHS government's legal team continued to lie, and Judge Cotter decided to progress the case with telephone hearings. During these hearings, I was told a lot of things that turned out to be untrue, e.g., "You've won your case. You will now be able to get legal assistance." However, when the case reverted to the physical courtroom, Judge Cotter changed his whole stance, behavior, and denied saying that I had clearly heard him say during the telephone hearings. I requested the transcription of the telephone hearings to help me prove that what I was saying was true. But the transcriptions came back with some sections missing and other sections ineligible. As the government's legal team had temporarily accepted the breach of my data, I took this information to Crown Hill Police Station for them to investigate. They decided not to look into the offense as another government department, namely the Information Commissioner's Office, IOC, had allegedly already dealt with the matter. However, the NHS had lied about the outcome of this investigation and claimed that disciplinary action had been taken, but that the nature of this was confidential. I knew this to be a lie, as there had been no disciplinary action against the perpetrator. When I explained to the police that the NHS were lying to cover up these actions, I was greeted by someone in a suit in Crown Hill Police Station coming out of the door just to tell me, "You are upsetting a lot of people." It was clear that they didn't take my complaint seriously. When I eventually received legal assistance from the Ashford solicitors, they arranged for me to see Head of Chambers Barrister John Isherwood. My sister attended this meeting with me as my previous experience had left me concerned about the level of corruption between the government and the legal services. When I met with John Isherwood, he quoted from printed out JSB guidelines for damages. When I questioned the validity of what he was quoting, he stuck to it vehemently, even after I pointed out to him that the stated guidelines were several editions out of date. I messaged Ashford solicitors to ask them to remove the instruction to use him, but they refused this request. The government's legal team started fighting my claim again and were allowed to do so by Judge Cotter. I questioned Judge Cotter about why he was allowing this, and he replied that they would, quote, "make things worse for themselves," end quote, by doing this if the court finds for me. This was a complete lie by Judge Cotter. I requested subpoenas of all the hospital staff who knowingly made false witness statements. This premeditated perjury, especially as the NHS knew that I had mental health problems and were aware that their actions would further damage my mental health. Judge Cotter, government officials, kept changing the location and dates of the hearings, moving from the magistrates to the county court and eventually only telling me the location on the day of the hearing. The corruption was further evidenced by Judge Cotter ruling that the court was closed off to the public as it, quote, wasn't in the public's best interest to see it, end quote. It was clear that they had something to hide. Judge Cotter then made the decision to refuse to allow my requested subpoenas and ruled out aggravated, exemplary damages. Throughout the case, the judge's government had tried everything to ensure that I would not be able to pursue my claim or be given a fair hearing. This was clearly behind the reason to stop all legal assistance until the evidence that I accrued was too much to deny. Then, to ensure they maintained control over everything, they offered me corrupted legal assistance. The government couldn't allow exemplary damages as this would become world law news, leading to substantial claims for wrongdoing. They therefore had to conceal the case and cover up the behavior of the NHS so to protect their own agencies and departments. I argued that the subpoenas and the other evidence that I had presented would expose the lies of the hospital staff, and NHS would prove the premeditated perjury and contempt for me and my mental health. I complained about Judge Cotter to the Office of Judicial Complaints, but my complaint was again ignored. I then took the case to the High Court of Appeal, where they refused my appeal without giving any reasons. As stupid as it seems in hindsight, I tried to gain a medical report through the NHS as evidence for the courts. At the time, I felt like I had no option but to do this, as without legal assistance I was unable to obtain a medical report from a consultant psychiatrist without a solicitor and couldn't afford a private consultation. Through the NHS, I went to see a Dr. Dennis, a consultant psychiatrist. My experience with Dr. Dennis has proved him to be a completely dishonest person. He said things in his report that were completely out of context and a misrepresentation of what I had said during my appointment with him. I tried to respond to the errors in his report to highlight his dishonesty, but the content of the report has significantly damaged my search for justice ever since, including my subsequent dealings with Veterans UK referred to in the next section of this document. Number 3. Armed Forces War Pension Tribunal Service, Government Corruption Case, ENT/00210/2017, including significant corruption and collusion by Veterans UK. As previously stated, I had completely blocked out what had happened to me in my Army service due to the stress that it had left me with. However, in 2016, I began to have severe issues with Personal Independence Payment, PIP, and my payments were unlawfully lowered without due reason being given for this. I was upset with how I had been treated and, despite having the right to appeal, decided that the stress that this was causing me was not helpful to my own mental health. I began to consider how I would come off of the PIP and considered a claim under the War Pension Scheme. I knew that I would potentially be on less money with a war pension, but I was prepared to accept this if it meant that I could be free of the lies and stress caused by my ongoing issues with my PIP payments. I had previously, and I now know incorrectly, assumed that my discharge from the Army was on medical grounds, as I was diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, and personality difficulties. This was the first time that I'd fully faced up to what had happened to me in the Army, and I realized that the significant change that had come about in my character as a result of my experience. I began to complete an application, but I struggled to recall some of the information as my mind kept kicking me out. I did not put down about the bullying and explain what happened to me. Following the submission of my application, I received a 2-sentence rejection reply stating, quote, "We have evidence that your health problems were not caused by service," end quote. However, as no evidence was offered in support of this claim, I appealed against this rejection. Colonel Nigel Lewis, only of SSAFA at the time, was the only support worker that I could rely on because of the severity of my mental health issues. The bundle for the tribunal was prepared by Veterans UK. When I asked for my written statements to be included in the bundle, Veterans UK refused. I submitted a complaint about this, and the complaint was rejected. However, as a result of this, they did reluctantly include my statements into the bundle. As soon as I saw the bundle, it was evident that the military records had been cherry-picked to damage my claim. Missing from the report were important documents such as my selection process records, where all checks on my history before service were made, records of the physical tests that I had successfully completed, records of my basic training at Litchfield, where I excelled, information from the 3-month supervision order that I had been placed on at Catterick Specialist Training Garrison, where I had reported being attacked by my NCO in charge, as well as by other recruits, whilst being trapped in my sleeping bag. Reports of the subsequent bullying that I experienced and had struggled with afterwards. Any mention of the decision to backtrack me to ensure that I was removed from that said bullying. The vast disciplinary records at my regiment in relation to the bullying I experienced when Sergeant Hunt attacked me for no reason, picked me clean up off the floor by my neck and strangled me in front of the other recruits. All AWOL records where I left to avoid the group bullying instigated by Sergeant Hunt. Numerous charges of being locked in the guardhouse in a desperate attempt to escape the bullying. Colonel Lewis attended the First War Pension Tribunal on my behalf in Birmingham on the 10th of November, 2017, ENT 00210-2017. This tribunal was adjourned after I highlighted the cherry-picked nature of the reports and the important missing evidence. Veterans UK were ordered to produce the misleading information. The Second War Pension Tribunal took place on 16th May 2018 and was attended by myself and Colonel Lewis. I was several minutes late to the tribunal and wasn't initially going to attend due to the corruption that I had previously experienced at the hands of the government. I already knew that this was going to happen again and had sent the tribunal panel an email on 2nd October 2017 predicting how they were going to behave. In the email, I included the names of their colleagues, government workers who had colluded in an attempt to undermine justice. The result of the tribunal was very much what I had anticipated. Veterans UK conspired to commit perjury by stating that they were unable to produce more than the cherry-picked military records they had already presented, despite being ordered to do so by the panel. By knowingly withholding this information, they presented a distorted view of my claim, and the tribunal panel decided to continue with the tribunal before I turned up. When I went to the tribunal, I started to go through everything that had happened to my service and explained all the bullying that I had experienced. I invited any questions from the panel on everything that I had stated, but had a completely unchallenged testimony. I then turned to Veterans UK, who had been quiet throughout my testimony, and asked them if they wanted to challenge anything I had stated. Veterans UK replied by saying that they were not disputing anything apart from medical grounds. Veterans UK investigated and accepted that I was bullied in service, but wouldn't give the associated bullying material records to the tribunal court when they were ordered to do so. Veterans UK stated clearly to the tribunal they weren't disputing the investigated and accepted bullying in my Army service, while at the same time refusing to present Sergeant Hunt's demotion records to the tribunal. I had requested Sergeant Hunt's military records in relation to the bullying of Private Curley, as this would clearly show that the Army knowingly put him in charge of me whilst he was under investigation for bullying. This was especially negligent, as I was still under a 3-month supervision order, having requested and been refused the chance to leave the Army following the bullying I had experienced at Catterick. Veterans UK, after investigating, accepted that I had been bullied both physically and verbally, but all associated military records were removed. I believed that this was done to severely weaken my claim. I strongly believe that the tribunal acted corruptly by allowing the hearing to go ahead without the full facts. Information was clearly left out in order to weaken my case. The panel rejected that I had been the subject of frequent bullying during my service, despite this being acknowledged during the investigations by Veterans UK, the Secretary of State. They gave no reason for ignoring this evidence and for dismissing my unchallenged testimony, which made a clear link between the abuse that I had suffered in the Army and my resulting health problems. The outcome of the panel was even changed from a split decision to an unanimous one, with a typo being blamed for this error. I tried appealing the result of the tribunal, as I did not receive a fair hearing, which is meant to be a basic human right under UK law. The Armed Forces Chamber rejected my appeal, and in response to the claim that the panel had ignored the bullying I had experienced, simply stated that the tribunal panel can make whatever decision it wants. I couldn't understand how both Veterans UK and the War Pension Tribunal could state that my mental health was not affected by the severe and sustained bullying I had experienced in my service as a 17-year-old child. So following the panel's decision, I looked into my diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder properly for the first time. I had always accepted the NHS diagnosis without questioning it. However, after looking into this more fully, I realized straight away that I was the complete opposite to the main features of ASPD. I was unaware at the time that Dr. Ailes' medical report to the court in 2011 had also completely ruled out ASPD. When I started to realize that I had been knowingly and wrongly diagnosed, I visited the community forensic team at Mount Gould Hospital, Plymouth. Even though I didn't have an appointment, one of the workers, Pete Baker, an ex-serviceman, kindly talked to me at great length about how I had been struggling and had been misdiagnosed. As a result of this conversation, I was told that I needed to get referred to them to be able to see them and receive help. Without my knowledge, Pete Baker contacted my GP and told her that he believed that I was suffering from complex PTSD. My GP, Dr. Mayer, an ex-servicewoman, agreed with this, and on 27 June 2018, diagnosed me with PTSD. I informed Dr. Mayer that Veterans UK would not accept her diagnosis, but she replied that as a GP she is able to diagnose PTSD. She then tried to refer me to secondary mental health, which is NHS policy where a GP thinks someone is suffering from PTSD. This referral was rejected by NHS Dr. Battersby, head consultant psychiatrist, saying that it was combat stress that I needed to see instead. I put in request to see combat stress and eventually went to Exeter to see a consultant psychiatrist. The consultant was angry, red-faced, and continually trying to provoke me by making ridiculous comments. I was not treated seriously, and so I left. I put in a complaint to Combat Stress, who responded by saying that they won't deal with me, but that the NHS should. My GP tried to refer me again and stated Combat Stress's position. However, Dr. Battersby rejected the referral again. My GP then arranged for me to see Plymouth Options, First Mental Health Services, where I saw therapist John Gleave. He stated that there is good evidence that my Army training trauma caused complex PTSD, but that I am far too complex for their service, and that I needed to go on a waiting list for secondary mental health therapy. I was told that the waiting list for this is approximately 82 weeks, and because my PTSD wasn't the result of me being in a war zone, I would have to wait for the full time, even though I was an ex-serviceman. I asked them to check this, and a manager confirmed it. I gave Veterans UK my GP's diagnosis of complex PTSD and asked for a review on medical grounds. This request was rejected despite the diagnosis. I then spent several months looking for a solicitor to help put in a civil claim for the personal injury I had suffered. I also looked for treatment online, as Combat Stress informed me that they were unable to help me as I needed more treatment than their service could provide. I was able to find a charity online called Veterans Resolution, who kindly offered me an 8 therapy session with Rosalind Townsend, who is an expert and author on PTSD. Rosalind Townsend gave my GP a report stating that I scored in relation to her assessment of PTSD symptoms. My score was 61, with 30 being the cutoff point to indicate PTSD. My GP tried to refer me again with the additional evidence with Rosalind Townsend's letter. Dr. Battersby rejected the referral again. Following 4 GP referrals being rejected by Dr. Battersby, I put in an official complaint. I then gave Veterans UK the letter from Rosalind Townsend, but again they rejected it. I asked Veterans UK to provide a medical, as they stated that they would only accept a report from a consultant psychiatrist. Veterans UK refused to provide a medical, claiming that they don't do that. I had already submitted complaints by this stage about Veterans UK behavior, which had all been ignored. Therefore, in December 2018, I involved my constituency MP, Sir Gary Streeter. After several months of being messed around and with no legal assistance being allowed, I put in a personal injury claim to the Queen's Bench Division of the High Court, QB 2018/000524. Sean Robert Grinyer versus MOD. I asked Sir Gary Streeter to write a letter on my behalf to the court explaining that I am a forced litigant in person with complex PTSD, and for the court to bear this in mind. Sir Gary Streeter refused to do this and told me that I would get nowhere with my civil claim. This is explained in more detail in Section 4. I struggled to afford to pay for a private consultant psychiatrist, but eventually saw Dr. Windsor. My surgery manager kindly agreed to be there as a support witness. Dr. Windsor agreed that I have complex PTSD symptoms, but also stated in his report that he wasn't given enough of my childhood records, even though he was given everything. It was also clear that he ignored the contents of Dr. Isles' earlier report. My surgery manager was unable to get Dr. Windsor to correct the inaccurate statements about my childhood records, and Dr. Windsor also refused several requests from me. I submitted the reports to Veterans UK, highlighting the problems with Dr. Windsor's report and his strange refusal in relation to my requests. After Veterans UK had received the original report, Dr. Windsor suddenly agreed to remove the incorrect statement that he had made. I then sent the amended report to Veterans UK and asked them to change it. However, they refused this request and said that they were going to proceed using the information from the earlier incorrect version. Veterans UK then rejected the report from Dr. Windsor as he had incorrectly stated that complex PTSD wasn't diagnosable at the time because it wasn't yet in ICD, International Classification of Diseases 10 or 11, but was going to be soon. However, I have since been told that this was incorrect, and it was diagnosable at the time of the report. After this, I was frustrated with what was happening and started looking through the paperwork that I would normally have to avoid due to how emotionally difficult I found it to read. As I read through the 2011 court report prepared by Dr. Isles, I could clearly see that the report completely ruled out the ASPD diagnosis that Veterans UK were using to discredit my case. His report actually states that I presented with the opposite of this diagnosis. This is important, as Veterans UK were corruptly clinging to the Dr. Dennis report, which I had proved to be inaccurate and misleading. When I presented the consultant psychiatrist court report by Dr. Eales to the Veterans UK, they again rejected it. Dr. Eales, while ruling out ASPD, had no knowledge of the blocked-out Army service trauma that I had previously referred to. I added Dr. Eales' report to my surgery record, as it had not been on there previously. My surgery manager kindly agreed to help me again and to go to the NHS complaint meeting with Dr. Battersby. At this point, Dr. Battersby couldn't give any proper answers to the questions that I asked and completely ignored Dr. Eales' medical report. When I questioned why I should keep a wrongful diagnosis, one that had been contradicted by another report, Dr. Battersby replied that a wrongful diagnosis can never be ruled out. Dr. Battersby rejected my complaint and refused to follow the NHS policy and procedure, even though she knew I wanted to take the complaint to the Ombudsman. After numerous unanswered complaints to Veterans UK, and with a full 16 months passing in between, they finally agreed to allow me to see a consultant psychiatrist who specializes in PTSD. I requested a specialist, as I'd absolutely no faith in them due to their previous behavior and refusal to properly examine all the medical evidence presented to them. I knew that this corruption would continue in a medical, so I stated that I only wanted to see an expert in PTSD. This was agreed, and I was assured that this is what I would receive. The agreement was documented and recorded in telephone calls with the Medical Provider Service and Fiona Rose. However, when Veterans UK failed to honor this agreement, they refused to give me access to the telephone calls to enable me to prove what had been said. Veterans UK government's corrupt medical by Dr. Ahmed. After being initially assured by Veterans UK that I would see a PTSD specialist, it was arranged for me to see Dr. Ahmed in Taunton to help him with his assessment, and being unsure of what Veterans UK had provided, I devised a bundle of paperwork and relevant information to help him. I made it clear in the paperwork that I would have witnesses with me when I attended the appointment. When I met Dr. Ahmed, I was kindly supported by my surgery manager, and I again explained to Dr. Ahmed how important it was for me to have witnesses due to Veteran UK's previous corrupt behavior. During the appointment, Dr. Ahmed spent virtually the whole meeting asking me about my childhood. I explained that I had very good friends growing up and that I had been a nice person who had looked forward to joining the Army. There were no concerns about my mental health prior to joining the Army, and the Army had done the relevant checks as part of the selection process. Dr. Ahmed then asked me to provide the contact details for a friend so he could verify what I had said before a follow-up appointment. However, Dr. Ahmed failed to do this. Unfortunately, my surgery manager couldn't attend the second appointment with me, so my support worker, Colonel Nigel Lewis, kindly agreed to go with me. I had my reservations about this due to what happened in the hearing with Master Davison in my civil claim, where Colonel Lewis said he had a recollection issue, discussed in Section 4. I was desperate at this stage and hoped it wouldn't happen again. I turned up early to the place where I was to meet Dr. Ahmed, and after I asked where to go, Dr. Ahmed came out to see me. I explained that I would be accompanied by a different witness for this appointment, and Dr. Ahmed offered to do 30 minutes by ourselves before the support worker arrived. I declined this and explained yet again that I needed a witness and would wait for them. He tried to persuade me to start the meeting without my witness, but I again declined. By this stage, I was growing very concerned with this behavior, given that he had already told me he would contact a childhood friend, but never did. I waited for Colonel Lewis to arrive and then proceeded with the appointment with Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed had already received my bundle of relevant information and my written statement. Dr. Ahmed dismissed Rosalind Townsend's information and claimed that she was not qualified to make a proper assessment. Dr. Ahmed initially claimed that he believed that I suffered from PTSD, but then seemed to change his mind and say that I don't suffer from avoidance, so therefore couldn't have PTSD. I explained that my whole life revolves around avoidance, but he ignored this. Dr. Ahmed also completely ignored Dr. L's court report and told me that he wasn't going to listen to anything I said. I was then left asking myself, what was the point in seeing him? Dr. Ahmed stated that there were only two ways you gain PTSD, either from earthquakes or from fear of imminent death. With the knowledge that I'd gained from talking with other experts, this didn't sound right at all to me. Dr. Ahmed asked me to sign a permission form to speak to family members and to gain access to my school records. I agreed and signed consent. Colonel Lewis then asked Dr. Ahmed how long he would have to gain this information and to produce his report. At this question, Dr. Ahmed started to act strangely and said that his report had to be in for the 16th of the month at the latest. The appointment was taking place on the 12th. Colonel Lewis challenged Dr. Ahmed about this timescale and questioned how he would be able to get the relevant information on time. Dr. Ahmed then walked us out of the building and told us outside that he was surprised he had been chosen to do the report, as he's a general psychiatrist only, not the specialist that I had been promised. I immediately challenged him and said that he shouldn't be making the assessment, but Dr. Ahmed replied by saying that he would be doing it anyway, as he had done reports for Veterans UK before. I asserted that I wouldn't be accepting his report regardless of what it said, as he wasn't appropriately qualified to be able to make an accurate diagnosis. Following this appointment, Colonel Lewis offered me a lift home in his car to save me from having to travel back alone on the train. I accepted his offer, and when we were in the car, I made sure that we went over what had just happened to ensure that there would be no recollection issues, as there had been in the civil hearing with Master Davison. We spoke about everything, and I made sure that I mentioned Dr. Ahmed initially stating that he believed that I suffered from PTSD. Colonel Lewis didn't disagree or challenge me about anything I said. The following day, I sent an email to Colonel Lewis about Dr. Ahmed's behavior, including him initially stating that he believed that I had PTSD. Again, Colonel Lewis did not disagree or challenge me about anything I had written. However, the next time I saw Colonel Lewis in person, he stated that he didn't recollect Dr. Ahmed mentioning that he believed that I had PTSD. Colonel Lewis stated that he could back everything else up that had been said. However, given how important the whole truth has been to me in my attempts to be treated fairly and justly, I reluctantly released Colonel Lewis from his support worker role on the grounds of two significant recollection issues that have hindered my case. I do fully believe that Colonel Lewis is a good man, but had been put in an impossible position due to the fact that he works for Veterans UK and has close links with the judicial system through a judge friend. I understand that I am going up against the government, and it's difficult for anyone to stand beside me against such a corrupt system. I thank Colonel Lewis for acting as my support worker, and I appreciate all the help he has previously given. Obviously, Colonel Lewis is welcome to take an independent lie detector test on the matters discussed above, but I know from experience that any such request will be declined. Following the incident with Dr. Ahmed, I again put in a complaint to Veterans UK. However, not only have they completely ignored this complaint, but they have also indicated that they will be proceeding to the next War Pension Tribunal without investigating this matter. This tribunal, ENT/0018/2020, is as yet to be arranged, and I have already sent an email to the judge requesting that Veterans UK investigate this complaint and get a response from Dr. Ahmed before the tribunal. Not to do so would mean an unfair hearing and would likely result in another avoidable adjournment. If this is not investigated before the hearing, then I would require a subpoena of Dr. Ahmed to the next tribunal hearing to ensure the full facts can be presented and to avoid another miscarriage of justice. Due to the continuing issues that I have been having with the apparent experts provided by Veterans UK, I decided that I had no option but to commission an assessment by a private consultant psychiatrist who specializes in PTSD. I contacted Professor Gordon Turnbull, an author and specialist in PTSD, and arranged an assessment. Professor Turnbull diagnosed me with complex PTSD. I have now given Professor Turnbull's report to Veterans UK, but have received no response from them. I have been informed that the report will be submitted to the tribunal panel. I have significant concerns that, given the previous behavior of the panel, Veterans UK are leaving everything for the next tribunal hearing and will ensure that the outcome of this is corrupted again. Number 4. Government corruption during my civil claim, Sean Robert Grinyer versus MOD, QB/218/00524. The timeline for this interacts with events outlined above in Section 3, and I only decided to put in a civil claim after experiencing such vast corruption and attempts by Veterans UK to cover up and conceal the bullying and trauma that I suffered during my Army service. In my dealings with them, they have tried to dismiss my PTSD and deny the clear and obvious link between what happened to me in the Army and the deterioration of my mental health, both during and following my service. I was finally diagnosed with complex PTSD on 27th June 2018 and made the decision to seek justice through the civil courts as it has been clearly denied to me before. As with my previous case against the NHS, I tried every avenue to gain some form of legal assistance and spent several months contacting solicitor firms and explaining the nature of my claim. The firms would ask for my name and tell me that they will get back to me. Many didn't get back to me at all, and the ones that did came out with a list of reasons why they would be unable to represent me. After being messed around like this for several months, I decided in December 2018 that I had no choice but to be forced litigant in person. Fully aware that it was likely that the court process would be corrupted by the government and prejudiced against me. Veterans UK refused to give me details of who the defendant of my said claim should be, and when I contacted the MOD, they told me that they didn't know either. With no one to support or guide me, I incorrectly put Veterans UK as the defendant. I was informed that DGIP claims are the defendants, but when I contacted them for information, their employee just laughed at me on the phone. This process was made difficult as the Queen's Bench began to give me false information and told me I needed to put in an application to amend my claim form. This was made more difficult as Master Davison ignored my applications and didn't tell me that they were wrong, thus allowing matters to drift. Also, my previous sealed claim was sent to a wrong address, which meant that I couldn't serve them on the defendant. At this point, I began to think the same tricks used to pervert justice in my case against the NHS were being used again here. I sent an email to Sir Brian Levison complaining about the behavior that I was being subjected to. I also put in further complaints about the conduct of the court, but all these have been ignored. On my particulars of claim, it clearly stated to the government's legal team, defendant, that I was relying solely on my war pension bundle for this civil claim, so all the information was already in the MOD's possession. The defendant had 28 days to file a defense, and on the 27th day of this time frame, the government's legal team submitted an application asking for more time to prepare their defense. In a single day, Master Davison dealt with their application and arranged a hearing date. I telephoned the court to ask if all these things could happen so quickly and was told that this was faster than the court process works. On the defendant's application order, they asked for approximately 4 additional months to gain the information required for the defense, information that was already stated in my particulars of claim and which the MOD had access to. I put in an order to set aside their application as it was clear to me that they had already had plenty of time to gain the information and submit their defense. At the same time as this, I also put in a complaint about Master Davison's behavior in assisting the government's legal team by allowing the request for further time to be heard faster than the court process works, whilst ignoring my own previously mentioned court applications. As per usual, the court ignored this complaint. High Court hearing with Master Davison on 15 May 2019 to consider the defendant's application for more time to file a defense and my counter-application against the defendant's application. Colonel Nigel Lewis kindly met me at this hearing, the hearing being before the incident with Dr. Ahmad outlined above. During the proceedings, Master Davison kept telling me to, quote, be quiet, end quote, whenever I highlighted that the government's legal team were knowingly lying, especially in relation to their claims that it took over 5 months to gain my war pension file from another department in the MOD. The government's legal team also stated that they had zero contact with Veterans UK, even though I had produced evidence that they had been in contact with them. Master Davison let them speak and accepted that they needed more time as they hadn't gained any of my paperwork from Veterans UK. At this hearing, the government's legal team told Master Davison that they hadn't even asked for it yet. Despite all this, Master Davison sided completely with the government's legal team and then read from his pre-prepared speech finding for them. I tried appealing this whilst also putting in another complaint about Master Davison's behavior. The complaint was ignored and my appeal was rejected with no explanation given other than that my appeal was fastidious, childish. Master Davison refused to send me his order. I chased this up and eventually received an email dated 23 June 2019 with the order. Colonel Nigel Lewis, who sat behind a table with me in the hearing, directly in front of Master Davison, stated that he couldn't recollect Master Davison reading from a pre-prepared speech when finding for the defendant. Colonel Lewis had already stated to me that he has a judge friend, so I put this down to a conflict of interest. I lost trust in Colonel Lewis after this, which is sad, as he helped me through a lot of SSAFA. After gaining my war pension file, the government's legal team made a massive mistake. Liars always make mistakes and cover-ups. The government's legal team only received my cherry-picked military records, and Veteran UK's knowingly committed perjury to the War Pension Tribunal by stating that they didn't have them when they were ordered to produce them. The government's legal team accepted that the reports of all the times that I went AWL were removed from my records. These were an important part of the evidence of the bullying that I had experienced and how I tried to escape it. Veterans UK were questioned about whether they would accept the bullying without evidence, and they stated that they wouldn't. With the government's legal team claiming that I don't suffer from complex PTSD and that I wasn't bullied in my service, they categorically refused pre-court protocol to try and resolve the matter before court proceedings got underway. They stated this position in their questionnaire despite my compliance with the protocol and recording that I would try to resolve the matter before it got to court. The government's legal team, who were collaborating with Veterans UK and received my, quote, missing, end quote, military records, accepted I had went AWL numerous times, so I highlighted the government's perjury and attempted to corrupt my claim, and this was completely ignored by the court for several months. It is now close to 20 months, and my claim hasn't even reached case management, the first stage of the court proceedings. Without being asked to do so, Master Davison is now trying to move my complaint out of the Queen's Bench Court in the High Court to put it in the Plymouth Court to hide the corruption, just like in my case against the NHS. I have said that I want it to remain in the High Court and was told that I would be notified of Master Davison's decision. I was not notified and wasn't given a copy of the order when he chose to move my claim against my wishes. The court only emailed me to notify me that they wouldn't accept any more emails from me as my claim had been moved to Plymouth. I believed that it was done this way because Master Davison knew that I would put in an application for an order to set aside his order. I did this as soon as I received the email. The High Court are currently refusing my attempts of putting in an order against Master Davison's corrupt behavior to hide my claim from the government in the corrupt Plymouth Court. The High Court are also ignoring my complaints about Master Davison and my request for him to be removed from my case because of his vast reported corrupt behavior and for his behavior of moving my claim illegally to be set aside. This isn't everything that I have experienced, but there's too much information to put here. Vast government ignored complaints that only a public inquiry could fully expose, of which the government would never allow at all costs. The list below details some of the main people ignoring my emails, highlighting the ongoing government corruption. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Met Commissioner Cressida Dick, Veterans UK Minister Johnny Mercer, Constituency MP Sir Gary Streeter, Liberty Human Rights Charity Martha Spurrier, ex-barrister, various press, including Rom Preston of Reach Group, who, against my knowledge and wishes, published a small part of my High Court civil claim. These and others are ignoring the serious information that has been sent. Sir Gary Streeter has stopped all contact with me since I kept asking for a public inquiry into this government corruption that is all fully provable. The government knows this and are attempting to block the course of justice. In addition to this, Sir Gary Streeter has also refused surgery appointments with me because I have to have a referral from him to the Ombudsman for them to look into Veterans UK vast corruption. The government have stopped the Ombudsman from investigating their cover-up. Veterans UK Minister Johnny Mercer has also totally ignored me for years. He has been fully informed of everything throughout. The government have recently also stopped the Standards Commission from looking into complaints about 3 MPs' behavior, Sir Gary Streeter, Johnny Mercer, and Alison Seebeck, in relation to my NHS case with the 2 corrupt judges. If the government can do all this towards me in 4 courts, how many other people have experienced similar injustices? The government acts as an organized criminal unit, and it appears that the law does not apply to them. If nobody stands up to the bad people, what future does humanity have with lying criminals running this country? A copy of this will be sent to the Queen, and I request that she look into the serious matters outlined. Countless times, I have stated that I will take any independent lie detector test on anything that I have stated here. I suffer from complex PTSD, so have to ensure that what I am being told is the truth. If it hadn't been for my case against the NHS, where I was the only proven truth teller, I'm sure the government would dismiss me and use my mental health problems against me. To all the people and ex-servicemen who the military have failed through lack of duty of care, especially programming young, strong men or women that you have to show no weakness at all times. Having PTSD is not a weakness, as it's something out of your control, and a lot of people don't know they have it, and us men or women can suffer in silence, and it can and will cause severe issues and suicide for many. And no one wants to diagnose it in my experience, as it becomes a money issue for the government, especially when people with severe PTSD struggle to fit into normal society and struggle to be able to work. Families also take on the said PTSD problems from the sufferer. Some of the strongest people have PTSD or mental health problems, but until people suffer from those said problems themselves, they have little idea what someone is actually suffering from and its effects. Why am I doing this, i.e. fighting the government in corrupted courts? For money? Ridiculous assumption, especially when, with the NHS case, I only wanted the NHS to state the perpetrator had been disciplined only. But after lies I had to fight that injustice in the only place you can, I then only wanted justice in line with the law, nothing more. Then, with my current corrupted MOD case, before this I only wanted a war pension in line with the rules. By gaining the said war pension, I knew I would probably be on less money than the PIP I'm on, as you don't get double paid, so for zero financial gain. The lies and corruption by Veterans UK to refuse the said war pension led me to going to the corrupted courts, but this time the Queen's Bench Division of the High Court, because the government fully corrupted the said previous NHS case in the Plymouth Court and concealed it from the public, as I already said. So what do I want? Firstly, for the truth in the government's pathological lying and covering up to stop. And then secondly, I want some good to come from this situation. I'm a nobody, but I want a full public inquiry before my MOD civil claim is dealt with to expose the vast government corruption, because in my said civil claim, I have put in for punitive damages for one reason of which I will now explain. In a non-corrupted court in the USA, companies in line with how much they can afford to pay can be fined billions of dollars in punitive damages. And in my situation, it's the government. So I would be the recipient of these said punitive damages. However, I will not take this money, as my intention is to use the punitive damages to help people suffering from PTSD and help for their families as well, to try and use the money to give a service where the military is failing and not caring, and the charities like British Legion, SSAFA, Help for Heroes, Combat Stress are not set up for whatsoever. Everything I've stated here is the truth. As already said, I welcome any assistance to stop the suppression of the truth by the government, and whilst I don't want any attention or to be doing this, I firmly believe if no one's trying to stand up to wrongdoing, then the world we live in will become a worse place for future generations. I can only do what I'm doing, and I have no expectations in today's society of being put under fear and control by the government that I will receive any help that I need by anyone who reads this. Yours sincerely, Sean Grinyer, March 8th, 2020.